The latest update we have, this is from Al Jazeera. At least 55 Palestinians were killed on Monday in Gaza and more than 2,700 others wounded as the Israeli army fired live ammunition, tear gas, and firebombs at protesters assembled along several points near the fence with Israel. The demonstrations, which coincided with protests against the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, are part of a weeks-long movement calling for the right of return for Palestinian refugees to the areas they were forcibly expelled from in 1948. Since the protest began on March 30th, Israeli forces have killed at least 104 Palestinians in the coastal enclave and wounded about 12,000 people. The protests come ahead of the annual commemoration of the Nakba, or catastrophe, when the State of Israel was established on May 15, 1948, in a violent campaign that led to the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their villages. So, literally, 55, and this might be outdated by the time I'm done today. 55 Palestinians were killed. By my count, we have eight children who were killed on top of the 55 that were murdered. I always like to say, because I always, of course, like to keep it real, I am not there, obviously. I am in New York. So all I could go on is the reporting that I have seen from various accounts, from pro-Palestinian accounts to obviously pro-Israeli accounts. But from the videos I have seen, from the photos I have seen, you had largely unarmed people being shot at, having missiles dropped on them in airstrikes, having live bullets shot at them. There have been people in the press fired at. There were Palestinians throwing rocks at Israeli soldiers. From what I see, there were Palestinians trying to, get through the Israeli wall. But even though obviously throwing rocks is not something, I would cheer, throwing rocks is not going to kill an Israeli soldier. Throwing rocks is not going to kill an Israeli resident. Bullets do kill, and 55 people have lost their lives. 55 people have lost their lives largely from real bullets, airstrikes being fired at majority unarmed people. Of course, I do understand. Put aside whether you think Israel has the right to exist or not. Put aside whether you think Israel is occupying the Palestinians. Put that aside for 1 minute. I know for many that's difficult to do. Put that aside for a second. Israel is a declared country, whether we like it or not. If protesters are firing rocks at soldiers, soldiers have a right to defend themselves. However, soldiers do not have a right to shoot them down dead. You don't have the right to kill people who are not trying to kill you. And America and American pro-Israel media, I'm going to get to the New York Times, which is just astounding, are basically reporting it as, oh, well, Hamas, is stirring the pot and Hamas is getting these Palestinians to protest, and Hamas is responsible for the deaths. Well, Hamas is a terrorist organization, no doubt about it. Hamas does issue propaganda. Hamas does urge people to kill Israelis and to kill Israeli soldiers. That is true. However, Hamas is not responsible for Israeli soldiers shooting Palestinians dead. That is the Israeli soldiers that are responsible. So two things could be true at one time. You could have a propaganda terrorist network that is trying to stoke up hatred. But honestly, I don't think the majority of the Palestinians need Hamas to inspire them to protest the day that the embassy was moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is basically a large, giant slap in the face to Palestinians. And a lot of you don't know this about me, so I'm going to keep it real. My father is probably the biggest Zionist I've ever met in my life. Loves Israel, thinks Benjamin Netanyahu could do no wrong. My older brother volunteered in the Israeli army. Both my brothers actually went to private Jewish school. I did not. And my older brother, for his love of Judaism and Israel, volunteered to serve in the IDF. And he is, he has moved back to America, but he served for 2.5 years. So I don't even bother talking to my father about Israel. I love my father. I love my father more than most. Other than my mother and my brothers, my father, I love him. However, I don't agree with everything he feels as far as Israel. I don't agree with my older brother as far as everything they feel. Doesn't mean I don't love them, but there are certain things that I just don't expend the energy on to fight with my father about. My father is one of these people who believe God gave Israel the land. I do not. He believes that Palestinians should not be protesting and trying to get up close to the Israeli wall. I think Palestinians have a right to protest. I don't think they have a right to throw rocks at soldiers, but Israeli soldiers do not. And the Israeli military does not have a right to basically open fire on unarmed people. There are non-lethal ways. Trust me, I was at Standing Rock. There are non-lethal ways of responding. I don't think the non-lethal measures should be the first effort or the first tools used. But I do understand if you have rocks being thrown at you, if you have projectiles coming your way, if Israeli soldiers feel Palestinian protesters are trying to breach their wall, they do have a right to defend themselves. That does not give them the right to murder 55 people. This on top of the 16 that were killed a few weeks ago in Gaza. Can you imagine if anything like this happened to an American ally? America would be calling it genocide. America would be calling it genocide. But America is backing Israel no matter what. And this was one of the New York Times headlines today. Tell me if something seems wrong here. Israel kills dozens at Gaza border as U.S. embassy opens in Jerusalem. And by the way, this was a headline they had changed. At first, it was just like dozens of Palestinians killed at Gaza border. Then they changed it to this. So let me get it straight. And a lot of people were saying this on Twitter. Dozens of Palestinian protesters killed in Gaza? How'd they die? Was there a lawnmower accident? The New York Times, dozens of protesters killed in Gaza. They won't even say what's actually happening. Then they change it to Israel kills dozens at Gaza border. Were they unarmed? Yeah, they were. How did they kill them? With airstrikes and live bullets. But you see, the corporate media is deathly afraid of criticizing Israel. I mostly cover domestic politics. I don't cover Israel and the Palestinian situation that much because there's a lot of problems in America that I cover, that I focus on. It is also not a pleasure for me to cover it because I know, just keep it real, I know I'm going to get a call from my father tonight wanting to talk to me for 2.5 hours explaining why I'm wrong because that's how he feels. And at times, I don't want to deal with it. But you got to do what's right. You have to report the truth. And this is the truth of what's happening. The Palestinians, thousands of them, came to protest what they see as a slap in their face, what they see as further occupation, moving the capital of Israel to Jerusalem, which the Palestinians believe Jerusalem would be a capital for their country. I mean, the pictures were startling. You see on Twitter, Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, Lindsey Graham, Senator Cruz. They're having breakfast and smiling for the cameras while At that time, it wasn't 55, but dozens and dozens of Palestinians are being murdered by Israeli soldiers. That contrast is sickening. It would be one thing if Palestinians were firing shots at Israeli soldiers. It would be another thing if they were hurling rockets. But from everything I could see on Twitter and the reports I've read, the majority of these protesters are unarmed. And again, although I don't condone hurling rocks, and I would not condone if the Native Americans at Standing Rock were hurling rocks or hurling things at police, I believe in non-violent protest. I think that is the only way that political measures can be effective. But throwing rocks and throwing things that will not kill soldiers should not be met. Let me repeat, should not be met with this kind of murder. And that's what it is, murder. Who knows by the end of this broadcast, by the end of today, what the death toll will be at. But I could tell you one thing, 2,700 people are wounded today. And it's only going to get worse because these protests are going to happen all week. So why is this happening? There's the official reason that America is giving. Hamas is helping to prop up these protests. They are radicalizing people to go and protest unarmed. That's not why it's happening. That's not why it's happening. Because I always tell you folks, and again, if you're coming to this late, I apologize. I'm not doing cocaine. I have serious allergies. I have to go to an allergist, but I have been sneezing for the last few weeks, and it's gotten so bad my eyes are itching. So, why is this happening? Follow the money, Lebowski. Follow the money. Indeed, today's unpopular announcement, and this is an article from a few weeks ago, indeed, today's unpopular announcement may have been exactly what two of Trump's biggest donors, Sheldon Adelson and Bernard Marcus, and what one of the biggest inaugural supporters, Paul Singer, paid for when they threw their financial weight behind Trump. And for this, they're talking about Trump pulling out of the Iran deal. Marcus and Adelson, who are also board members of the Likud Republican Jewish Coalition, have already received substantial returns on their investment. Total alignment by the U.S. behind Israel, next week's move to the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, and the official dropping of occupied territories to describe the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Adelson, for his part, was Trump and the GOP's biggest campaign supporter. He and his wife Miriam contributed $35 million in outside spending to elect Trump, $20 million to the Congressional Leadership Fund, a super PAC exclusively dedicated to securing a GOP majority in the House of Representatives, and $35 million to the Senate Leadership Fund in the 2016 election. That has now been updated. Trump fan Sheldon Adelson places $30 million bet on the midterms. Republicans have a not-so-secret weapon to counteract all those small dollar donor Democrats, a few very rich friends. Politico reported Thursday that casino mogul Sheldon Adelson recently gave $30 million to the Congressional Leadership Fund, the Paul Ryan-aligned super PAC that plans to spend big defending House Republicans this fall. So, Mr. Trump, who during the campaign I told all his supporters, all this talk about, oh, Jeb Bush's a puppet, Hillary Clinton's a puppet. I mean, they are. He was right about it. But you wait till Trump needs their money. You wait till Trump starts kissing the ring of Sheldon Adelson and Paul Singer and Charles and David Koch. And that's what he's doing, folks. Why do you think it is that Trump found it so important to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem? I could give you 25 million reasons why, and now 30 million reasons why, for the House to stay in Republican control. Why do you think it is he pulled out of the Iran deal? You want to be a fly in the wall in his meetings with Sheldon Adelson? Why do you think it is that his administration is now not calling them, settlements? Follow the money. So basically, it's not Hamas that is causing this. It is Donald Trump his bought-off administration and Sheldon Adelson. That's what's really going on here. Because Trump was a fake populist. And as I always say, I don't cover Donald Trump that much. I don't feel I have much to add that the corporate media that covers him 24/7 already does all day. And I have a story about that later. Wait till you hear this story about the corporate media and Trump. But he is a dangerous man. He is not a populist. If there is even one person watching right now that voted for Donald Trump, you need to know this is not a populist. This is a drifter. Donald Trump is a drifter. He's a huckster. He will say one thing on, for breakfast and say another thing for lunch and say another thing for an afternoon snack. And before you know it, dinner, it's a whole different language. Because Donald Trump is about winning now in the short term and making the deal now. And Sheldon Adelson pulled up a cash brick truck and Donald Trump is taking it. But whether you believe in Israel's right to exist, which I actually do, some of you might not like that, but I do believe in Israel's right to exist. But I do not believe that Israel is always right. I do not believe Israeli soldiers have a right to basically bazooka gun style murder 55. Again, that was when I started. I don't know what the number's at now. 55 Palestinians have died. Almost 3,000 are wounded. 8 children were killed. And you have language like this. Listen to what Israel's defense minister said. I couldn't believe this. I could not believe this. Headline, Nazis who died in World War II. That's what he's comparing the protesters on Gaza right now. Israeli Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan appeared to liken Palestinians killed in ongoing border protests to Nazi casualties in World War II when he tweeted about the death toll in Gaza. Erdan said the number of Palestinians killed at Monday's protest doesn't indicate anything, just as the number of Nazis who died in the World War doesn't make Nazism something you could explain or understand. The 6th week of the Great Return March protests has been the most deadly, with 52 fatalities, it's now 55, reported so far on Monday. Erdogan placed the blame for the death solely on Hamas, which is in power in Gaza. All responsibility for the bloodshed lies with the leaders of Hamas, who, with Nazi anger, endlessly shed blood to erase from people's memories their own failures in the management of the Gaza Strip. Here it is, the truth. Erdogan said that Israel does not wish to escalate and doesn't want the death of residents in the Gaza Strip. He said that the people who do want this are solely the leadership of the Hamas terrorist organization, which uses a cynical and malicious use of bloodshed. First of all, the fact that this man is a public official in Israel is a disgrace, because he obviously doesn't know history. He obviously doesn't know Jewish history, and he doesn't know what the Holocaust was. Whether Hamas itself is encouraging protesters to go protest or not, like I said, I don't think the majority of protesters need Hamas to encourage them to go protest when the embassy is moved to Jerusalem. I think they're doing it largely on their own. They feel they are being occupied, and they are protesting largely on their own. But last time I checked, a certain portion of Palestinians throwing rocks at soldiers is not the same thing as Nazis herding up the Jews, taking them on trains to gas chambers. That is not the same thing. Palestinians throwing rocks are not the same thing as Nazis literally tossing skeletons underground and people underground that they've gassed to death. What the hell is wrong with him? And this is the right-wing ideology of the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who I'll give Obama credit on one thing. He had it right with Netanyahu, because Netanyahu is a zealot. He is the John Bolton of Israel. This is massacre. This is murder, straight up. This is not Israel defending itself. There are ways to defend yourself if protesters are trying to breach your security wall. There are ways of defending if rocks are being thrown at you that do not include murder. But you have CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post and MSNBC. They have, neocons on who say, well, Hamas is behind this. And Jake Tapper literally led his show for like 4 minutes saying this and then moved on. Just move on. 55 killed in Gaza, 2,700 wounded. Off to, people, somebody in the Trump administration made a bad, vile joke about John McCain. And we need to talk about Melania Trump has a kidney infection that she had surgery on. I think Melania Trump having kidney surgery is a news story. But do I think Melania Trump having kidney surgery versus 55 people being murdered in Gaza, 2,700 wounded, eight of the murdered children, is the lead story that should be on? I've watched CNN. I haven't seen one Palestinian on today. We'll see if MSNBC. I haven't watched MSNBC today, but I doubt they're going to have that many Palestinians on. I can promise you that. And if you're coming to this late, I say this, all of this, at great risk to myself personally. Not risk of anything bad happening to me, but as I said, I grew up in a very Jewish family. My father might as well have a bromance with Bibi Netanyahu. He is a major Zionist. I love my father. I defend him, even though I don't agree with him on this. He was raised very differently. He went to a Zionist camp as a kid. His heart is in the right place. I just think he's very misinformed. My older brother, who I love dearly, was in the IDF. He volunteered. He is a little bit more reasonable on these things. He does not agree with the settlements. And he does think, in certain retrospects, Israeli soldiers are using too much force. But I don't agree with him on everything. And I promise you, when my father sees this video, I'm going to get a call and I'm going to get chewed out. He might not even invite me to, the picnic this summer. But I got to say what's right. I got to do what's right. So this is what's going on. I hope that I do not have to come back tomorrow to report that there are additional murders. Well, I just refreshed the page, and unfortunately there are. Now it's 58. 58. And I don't want to let the Democrats off the hook either. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Schumer applauds Trump on moving U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Schumer takes a lot of money from some wealthy Jewish donors as well. In a rare moment of agreement with President Trump, Senate Minority Leader Charles Schumer on Monday praised the president for moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. In a long overdue move, we have moved our embassy to Jerusalem. Every nation should have the right to choose its capital. Schumer said in a statement. I sponsored legislation to do this 2 decades ago, and I applaud President Trump for doing it. The statement echoed a sentiment Trump expressed in a video message presented at the embassy opening, in which the president said the move has been a long time coming. Nowhere did Chuck Schumer even comment on the murders going on. It's disgusting. You're a Democrat, Chuck Schumer? Party of the people? Democrats, a long, long time ago, were anti-war. Democrats were anti-Vietnam, in large part, towards the end. And you don't say a word? You don't say a word about 58 people being killed? Just keep taking that money, Chuck. Keep taking that money. Because if you, Chuck Schumer, is Jewish, I'm not a Bible expert. I'm certainly not a religious expert. I'm not religious myself. But I do know this. Judaism does not endorse murdering unarmed and innocent people. So what you're doing to keep your donors happy is a disgrace.